Sonic, the heart of your system.
Hi and welcome to the Blind PC Building Challenge. Obviously it sounds like a typical YouTuber challenge, but it's kind of not. It also has a deeper meaning. The thing is, my right eye has only about 40% remaining vision or eyesight. That's why I'm getting a laser laser correction in about 2 days. But then I thought about what is going to happen if I have zero vision left, if I'm blind. And then I thought about maybe let's do a challenge where we're going to build a PC blind, like blindfolded, and measure how long it will take us. And then in the end, we will auction this PC, and the money from the auction will be donated. In the end, I will also nominate 2 other YouTubers. I have to think about who I'm going to pick first, but I think, or I hope that you will continue watching this video until the end. I have some quite interesting components right on this table. Half of them I already had from previous projects, and the other half I got from vendors to support this project. So thank you very much for joining in and for donating the components to this challenge. We will go over the components while I'm going to assemble the system. I think it will be kind of a challenge, especially the cable management. I mean, plugging a CPU into the socket should be fine, but like the power and reset stuff will be a challenge, or a USB connection on the mainboard. We will see how it turns out. I think let's just get right to it. Okay, let's get to it. I will blindfold my eyes so I cannot cheat.
Roman? No.
Yeah.
I have another.
Absolutely beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Fox style?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. All right, here we go. And in this type of video, unfortunately, I have to do dubbing. There is no way that I'm going to build this twice, or it would also be kind of unfair because obviously you learn from your mistakes. For example, if I would shoot the German video first and then the English video would be different. But let's start with the X570 TUF from Asus. I also have a 3800X right here next to me. In the end, there will be a 3700X placed inside the system, but the 3700X didn't make it in time, so we will just start with the 3800X for now. Luckily, the FPGA socket from AMD is so much more convenient than the LGA socket from Intel, and yeah, I was lucky and I inserted the CPU correctly on the first try. Using an NVMe drive from ITRaidDE, the S50 that I used previously in one of my NVMe RAID reviews. Localize the M.2 slot is luckily not that difficult. I could find it right away underneath the CPU, and now I only have to attach the mounting screws that are then holding down the M.2 drive. Thanks again to ITRaidDE for sponsoring this XPG S50 Generation 4 NVMe drive. Yeah, that was easier than I thought, and we're only 4 minutes out. Memory comes from Corsair using a Vengeance Pro kit, 3200 MHz, 16 GB in total. Inserting the memory DIMMs is a little bit more difficult than I thought, mainly because I have to insert it into the second slot, but I also have to localize or find out in which direction I have to plug the DIMM. That's why I tried the first slot first, and once I managed to insert the DIMM inside the first slot, I took it back out and moved it back to the second slot. Following the sticker on the stick, I knew how to plug the second DIMM inside the fourth slot. Now I was thinking about which step to take next, but first let's make some space on the table, throw away the packaging that is not necessary anymore. From the mainboard accessories, we basically only need the I/O shield. All the other components like SATA cables are not necessary. Using my own case is certainly an advantage here because I know everything about this case and know how to take it apart. Even being blindfolded makes it a lot more easy than using a random case I haven't worked with before. After removing top, front and side panel, I was looking for the AIO that was right in front of me on the table, but I couldn't find it first. At this point I thought, hey, it's only 10 minutes. This won't take that long, but oh god, I was really wrong here. At this point there really was some chaos in my mind and I didn't really know what to do next. So first move the case to the side and then unpack the GPU. Luckily I had Mary around filming this video and warning me with this mainboard, otherwise, I don't know, could be dead now. At this point I really want to thank Asus for providing components to this build. They didn't know about the build, I was just using components they sent to me previously, so I had this 5700 XT TUF already lying around and used it for this build. Getting rid of some additional packaging material and then trying to figure out if there are any unnecessary stickers on the GPU I have to remove. Figure out there is nothing on the front, but obviously there is always something on the back plate of the GPU. Now placing the GPU onto the mainboard, I know this looks kind of cringy, but it's so much easier for me to locate it later. I've been using Corsair AIOs for a very long time, so I'm very familiar with them. That's why I'm pretty sure that Corsair AIOs are not a problem for me to mount, but I never used one of those Corsair PSUs before, especially the fully modular ones. And first I thought about, hey, why not just take a PSU that has all the cables already attached to it? Much easier because I don't have to plug the cables into the PSU. But then I thought, hey, I will have such a mess inside the case with all those cables. That's why I'm still going for a modular PSU, and now I have to find all the individual cables. Found the 24 pin first, and now I'm figuring out that this is a 6+ to PCI Express cable, so that's for GPU power supply. Now I only have to find the 8-pin EPS for mainboard power delivery. We also need a SATA cable for power of the AIO and also for power of the case itself. And here we already have the SATA cable. Finding the cables was easy. Now I only have to find the mounting gear for the PSU, aka the 4 screws that will attach the PSU to the case. Now we are at a point of almost 20 minutes. For me it felt like it was only 15 minutes, but it was getting harder and harder to concentrate and focus on those things. I had to differentiate the 8-pin EPS cable to figure out which side goes into the PSU, and the one with the very small notch goes into the PSU and the one with bigger side goes into the mainboard. But now to feel and locate where I really have to plug those cables is extremely difficult. And first I don't know why, but I always tried to plug in the 8-pin EPS connector into the 24-pin connector, and that was really frustrating. I think in total I spent like almost 15 minutes trying to figure out where I have to plug in the cables. Then I had a food delivery in between, which was a short break, but I forgot to pause the timer on my tablet. That's why we're about 12 minutes wrong on the timer right now. But I received a restock of my Coke Zero at home, and yeah, that's not sponsored. Okay, putting the Coke can on top of the case is probably not a wise idea, especially if I don't see what I'm doing. That's why I thought, hey, let's put it in the back somewhere, and okay, I have no idea where I wanted to put it. That's why I put it next to this AMD Ryzen packaging box. I already spent about 10 or 15 minutes trying to plug a single 8-pin EPS connector into the PSU. Still didn't manage to plug a single cable into the PSU itself, and yeah, had to try again.
Okay, die Nase sind der Anhaltspunkt auf jeden Fall. Das ist aber nicht breit genug dafür, das ist breit genug dafür. Und jetzt so schnell rein. Geht das rein?
After trying to plug the 8-pin EPS connector the 10th time into the 24-pin connector, I kind of figured out this is a longer connector, and then I thought, hey, yeah, that's where the 24-pin has to go, and maybe it's easier to plug this one first. The O11 Dynamic XL features this plate on the back of the case where you can hide your cable management, or the cable management you don't have underneath, and I desperately tried to remove this plate, and for some reason I just couldn't locate the screws that are fixing this plate. And even after I thought I found the correct screws, I still removed the wrong ones that are mounted on top of the case and not the ones that are underneath. The cables which are attached to the case, such as USB 3, USB Type-C, everything that's attached to the front panel is probably the most difficult about building a PC blind. There are so many different connectors, and even after you located the one you're just looking for, could be that it falls out of your hand and it's gone again, and you have to keep looking again for another 10 minutes. It's time to mount the PSU inside the case, which is kind of easy because you know that the fan always goes to the side panel. And then you only need 4 screws in total to fix the PSU itself. The only challenge at this point is not to fix the screws inside one of those ventilation holes. The I/O shield is fairly simple because we have those small and round holes, and they always face downwards. Those are the holes where the audio solution of the mainboard is inserted. That's why finding the correct orientation of the I/O shield is fairly simple. Regarding those PCI Express slot covers on the bottom of the case, I decided to simply remove all of them and just leave one single screw on top for orientation to find which would be the first slot inside the case. But I didn't really know at which position the graphics card would be located in later. That's why I just decided to remove all of those slot covers, which will make it easier for me to mount the GPU later. At this moment I realized that I was missing all the screws that come with the case, and I was thinking, where are all those screws? And then I was remembering that there's this box inside one of those hot swap cases. Took it out, but now I had to sort the screws, and sorting the screws is extremely difficult because we have those inch screws and also we have the matrix screws, which are typically M3, and now I had to find M3 screws to insert them into those standoffs to in the end mount the mainboard. This step can be a little bit difficult because moving the mainboard, or especially the PCB of the mainboard, too many times across those standoffs from the case, it's kind of easy that you scratch the PCB and therefore damage the mainboard permanently. That's why I had to be extremely careful at this point. Having the mainboard mounted inside the case was really a relief. The question now was if I'm going to mount the AIO first or the VGA. Mounting the VGA would kind of have it in the way for mounting the AIO, that's why I decided to mount the AIO first. Lifting the case up vertically, nothing fell out, which means that the mainboard was mounted correctly. Now attaching already the 24-pin connector while I have easy access and nothing is in the way like the AIO, also attaching the 8-pin EPS connector from the PSU through the pass-through on top of the case to the mainboard. The notch of the 8-pin EPS connector is always facing upwards, that's why I knew in which direction I had to attach the cable. Unpacking all those different items from the AIO, I was mounting why everything is wrapped and packed individually. It's kind of a waste of materials at this point. Like, why would you wrap the inside of the AIO in one of the plastic bags in addition, and also the fans were packed in plastic bags individually. Really, I'm not one of those guys, but at this point I really thought this is a pure waste of resources. And then I noticed there is this cover on the bottom of the AIO, which means that there should be thermal paste pre-applied to the AIO, which is kind of a problem, or would be a problem later. You will see why. But also makes my life kind of easier because I didn't have to apply thermal paste to the CPU manually. After throwing away the cover, I immediately noticed that this was a mistake because I had to completely assemble the AIO first, and yeah, the thermal paste was there and I had nothing to cover up the thermal paste. And after I almost smashed my face with the AIO, I had to change the mounting mechanism because the Corsair AIO comes with the Intel mounting mechanism already attached to the block, but we had to change it to the AM4 mounting gear. On this AIO everything is pretty much plug and play, is very easy to use, and I was pretty happy that we're not using Intel because I didn't have to use any kind of backplates, just using those small 2 clamps, attaching them into the AIO block, and then we only have to add 2 more screws and thumb nuts and we would be ready to go and have the AIO ready for being mounted onto the mainboard. This is really one reason why I love the AM4 socket, because it makes mounting one of those AIOs extremely easy. Here we see the screws I was previously talking about, the ones that lock into the stock AMD socket. Going back and talking about unnecessary packaging, I was also wondering why every single cable is wrapped with one of those cable ties, and it was extremely frustrating also because I kept turning them into the wrong direction, basically tightening them instead of releasing them. Choosing RGB fans didn't really make my life easier because they don't only come with a single cable, the 4-pin fan cable, but they also come with the additional RGB cable that also has to be attached to the AIO block later. After 1.5 hours of building the PC blind, I had to take a break because it's extremely hard to keep focusing all the time, touch everything with your hands and trying to imagine where you have to put things, where you have to put the screws, sorting stuff. It's really difficult, but Mary watched that I'm not cheating, and even after taking a break she made sure that I'm just walking into this room blindfolded so I cannot see anything. I'm still in the same condition and still working on mounting the fans to the AIO. For some reason those screws were extremely tight. I'm not sure if it's related to some kind of paint that's inside the threads of the radiator, or if it's always that difficult to put those screws inside those radiators, and I was a little bit worried to use, I don't know, the wrong length or pushing too much force with the screws into the radiator, because previously, or let's say in the past, it could happen that if you push those screws too deep inside the radiator that you could damage a radiator permanently, that you would move the screw inside the fins, but I was hoping that with the nowadays AIO something like this wouldn't happen anymore. And here we see the result of removing the AIO cover while there was a thermal paste applied on the block. Yeah, that was not wise. I should have left the cover mounted to the block and then remove it at this point, but there was still enough thermal paste applied to the block. I think it should be sufficient to still mount it to the mainboard and the CPU. Again, the screws were the biggest challenge because it was so difficult to put them inside the thread of the radiator. That's why I was really not sure if I was taking the wrong screws with the wrong thread or if there was just paint stuck in there. And this made it even more difficult to mount the radiator on top of the case. But first I had to find the correct screws again. Now aligning the radiator to the top part of the case. I couldn't remember that the O11 Dynamic XL only has one line on the left and then has 3 lines for mounting the radiator and the fans to the right. Fixing the radiator was only the first step. Now it came to the cable management, and this is really extremely annoying because you have the RGB cables you have to attach to the AIO, you have the fan cables you have to attach, then you also need a USB cable that goes into the block, and the last cable you have is also SATA power connection. Before we go over to the GPU, I thought it would make it a little bit easier if I first move out the 6+2 and 8-pin PCI Express cables through the pass-through of the case and then mount the GPU. When it comes to the cables of the AIO, the RGB cables are a little bit more thin. I think they're also 4-pin cables, same as the typical fan connectors, but the fan connectors are a little bit more thick, so that's a little bit easier to differentiate. And now we get to the AMD mounting, and that's one reason why I really love the AMD socket and also the AMD mounting system. You have those 2 hooks where you can attach the AIO to. Extremely simple, even though I didn't find the screw at this point. Once I found the screw, just tightening the 2 thumb nuts and then the AIO is already good to go. Due to the fact that there is a GPU backplate on the backside of the graphics card, it makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of align the GPU to the PCI Express slot, or to feel with your bare hands where you have the slot and then kind of slide the card into it. In the following step I have to fix the GPU with 2 thumb screws to the case, and this part is always a little bit more tricky because it's really up to tolerances. If the tolerances are not extremely tight, you typically have to push your GPU a little bit towards the I/O shield or push it away from it, and therefore it's really difficult to fix those screws. But after about 15 minutes I managed to fix the GPU. Yeah, that was one more relief. I didn't do that much yet with 5700 XTs, that's why I was not sure what kind of power configuration those cards had, if it was 8+8 pin or if it was 6+8 or if it's 8+6, and what kind of location. That's why I used a screwdriver to locate in which position I had to plug the power cables. It really started to look like a PC, but yeah, cable management still needs a little bit of work. To be honest, looking at this afterwards, seeing how the cables behind there looked like, it doesn't look that much of a mess, but if you just have your hands and you can only touch and kind of feel what kind of cables are located where, it's extremely difficult to get an image in your head how it really looks like. Luckily everything inside PCs is kind of like Lego. You only have those connectors that fit into the other connectors, so it's extremely easy, and I think personally there is not really an excuse not to build the PC yourself. Since we're using an AIO, we only have a sensor cable that has to be plugged into one of the fan headers of the CPU or alternating CPU fan headers. I also wanted to be cool and adjust my cable management a little bit, hide those cables behind the radiator, but then, yeah. The cable got stuck inside the fan and I thought this is the location behind the radiator, but I was just pushing the cable inside the fan. That didn't really help. Back to the cable management and everything that's related to the front panel. So we have USB 3, we have audio, we have USB Type-C. At this point I didn't even know that the board doesn't have USB Type-C. That's why I first tried it, and then it was really frustrating. Then I stopped trying to plug in USB Type-C, but I figured out that there is a USB 3.0 connector underneath the 24 pin, which is a very common location for USB 3.0, but USB 3.0 can also be difficult because there are so many and very small pins. If you plug the cable a little bit wrong, like bend it to a wrong location, it's very easy to bend the pins inside the socket of the USB 3.0 connection. Front panel audio, on the other hand, is fairly easy because on this case we don't have USB 2.0 and the only connector with this type of shape will be front panel audio. Even on the mainboard you can locate front panel audio quite easily because it's always on the bottom left somewhere. You can spot or feel some capacitors, and that's typically the audio area. And then somewhere next to it you should have the pin header, and you can locate this connector by the fact that the second pin on the top right is empty. A USB 2.0 connector, on the other hand, has an empty pin on the bottom row and on the total right. Now it's time for the Mission Impossible, because the remaining connectors are those small jumper-like looking connectors that contain reset, power or power LED, HDD LED, and it's basically impossible to differentiate which connector is doing what. The only way I can figure out which connector is doing what is by knowing at which location the power button is placed on the motherboard. Luckily this is standardized a little bit, so we know that on the top row the third and the fourth pin from the left should be the power button. And now the only thing I have to do is plug all the individual connectors one by one, press the power button and check if the system is powering on. Not going to lie, I was extremely close to cheating at this point, just taking off the blindfold and check what's written on this individual connector, but I was really lucky, and I think the fourth or fifth try I had the correct location, system was powering on. The feel of relief at this point is really hard to describe, and I was really lucky and happy that everything worked out. Attaching the side panel, front glass panel, side glass panel, and also the top cover, and then we should be ready with this system. At this point I didn't know that I didn't really align things properly. I really underestimated the difficulty of this challenge, and even though I built hundreds of systems in my career, it was still extremely challenging and difficult. I think I will not get the top rating because my cable management on the bottom is not perfect. I didn't plug in the reset and also not the power LEDs because I just couldn't know what the correct position would be. Kind of failed on the side panel, and here we have the residues of my thermal paste accident. Alright, final result, 2 hours and 42 minutes. I will deduct 12 minutes right here because I had a food delivery of 12 minutes in between while we were shooting this video, and I didn't pause the counter right here. That's why I will deduct 12 minutes, 2.5 hours I think. It's quite okay, and it was much more of a challenge than I thought. When I thought about the project, I just thought about the very obvious things like putting the CPU in the socket, like mounting the AIO, but just the very small things like finding the screws is much more difficult than I thought before. Thank you very much to all the partners and sponsors that supported this project. So thank you very much to Caseking for the case, to Asus for the mainboard and the GPU. You didn't know that I'm making this project, but I'm just reusing your components. Corsair for the components, AData for the S50. Thank you very much for being part of this competition. And I'm nominating Steve from Gamers Nexus and also Simon from ITRaidDE. ITRaidDE is a German YouTube channel. Steve, I hope you will join into this competition, and I hope you will take at least 2 hours and 31 minutes. Select any hardware you like, any case you like. I think just stick with basic components like mainboard, SSD, CPU, memory, VGA, and any kind of cooler you like, air cooler, AIO, anything, it's up to you. The system was already sold for 1,200 euro to one of my Patreon supporters. Thanks for taking the system. I think it's also a very good deal. I think the main components should be worth like 1600, 1700 euro. I think it's a very good deal. Anyway, I donated the 1,200 euro to an organization in Germany which are taking part of people to fulfill their last wishes. It's called Wishwagon, which I think is a very cool thing. You can donate to whatever you like. Steve and Simon, you don't even have to donate, it's up to you totally what to do with the money from the system. And I also added another 1,200 euro from my side, so the total amount that was donated to Wishwagon is 2,400 euro. Steve and Simon, I'm waiting for your videos. Thanks so much for joining in, and I hope you had some fun with this video, even though we had to do probably subtitles or I had to do dubbing afterwards. I'm not sure, because obviously this is something I cannot shoot twice, and no way I'm going to build this a second time blind. No way. Thanks for joining in. See you next time. Bye.